opening the center instantly. That pawn spearhead seeks immediate central influence and prepares swift development for its knights and bishops. Instantly mirroring white's central pawn establishes symmetry and prepares for a dynamic, open game. Developing the knight to f3 immediately contests black's central pawn and prepares kingside castling, a foundational principle of opening play. Developing your knight to a central square like c6 is a solid, standard response, reinforcing your e5 pawn and preparing for queenside development. Unveiling the Ruy-Lopez. White immediately challenges black's knight and prepares central pawn pushes, aiming for positional dominance. Challenging white's bishop directly forces a decision, potentially gaining space but also slightly weakening the queenside pawn structure. Preserving the bishop's influence on the long diagonal forces black to commit their pawn structure. Strengthening the center and preparing for a solid pawn structure. This quiet maneuver aims to develop peacefully, securing the king amidst developing pressure. This maneuver prioritizes safety and prepares for the central conflict ahead. Boldly challenging the knight establishes immediate tension, potentially creating tactical opportunities by pinning a key defender near the king. Challenging the bishop's outpost on g4. White initiates a probing inquiry that could force a decision regarding the piece's placement, potentially creating structural weaknesses or opening lines for attack. The bishop retreats, preserving its long-term influence while subtly reinforcing the central pawn structure and preparing for potential pawn advances on the queenside. Solidifying the pawn center and preparing to expand on the queenside. This move aims to secure the e4 pawn and create a flexible structure for future queenside play, potentially unpinning the knight and gaining central space. Focusing the queen onto the f-file can create immediate attacking pressure, potentially setting up a follow-up attack against white's kingside. But it also brings the queen out early and might make it a target for white's developing pieces. Aggressively pushing the kingside pawns. White aims to dislodge the black bishop and gain space, though it might create weaknesses around the king. This pawn storm is a double-edged sword, opening lines for attack but also potentially exposing the monarch if the advance isn't supported. Black needs to be wary of the ensuing tactical fireworks and potential king safety issues. Diverting the bishop from the danger zone on the kingside. Black seeks to maintain piece coordination while white's aggressive pawn advances create potential weaknesses. This retreat, though passive for the moment, preserves the piece and avoids immediate tactical complications arising from the h3 and g4 pawn pushes, opening the center to challenge black's bishop and seize initiative. Sacrificing the bishop for an isolated pawn. Black throws a tactical wrench into white's comfortable development, hoping to disrupt the queenside and expose white's king. This gambit demands precise calculation and a keen eye for counterplay, as the material deficit could quickly become fatal if white defends accurately and exploits the open lines. The game shifts into a sharp, dynamic struggle where aggressive piece play will be paramount. Challenging black's queen's aggressive outpost. White repositions the knight to support a potential e4-e5 pawn push and prepare for kingside castling, seeking to neutralize the immediate tactical threats and develop a more robust central presence. The bishop tucks back, a familiar retreat, now aiming to solidify its position on a more passive diagonal, relinquishing the aggressive pressure it previously exerted. Stripping black's bishop from its open diagonal creates an immediate pawn structure imbalance, potentially exposing the king's safety on the queenside. Opening the b-file for your rook creates immediate counterplay against white's central pawn structure, forcing a reconsideration of their aggressive kingside pawn push. Reclaiming the pawn with the bishop's capture immediately forces black to confront the doubled C pawns, a positional scar that will likely plague their queenside for the remainder of the game. White's central pawns now have a commanding presence, ready to surge forward and dictate the flow of action across the board. Embracing the doubled pawns, black aims to activate the newly freed bishop and potentially challenge white's central control with the advanced e-pawn, seeking dynamic counterplay despite the compromised pawn structure. Reclaiming the pawn with the knight immediately ignites the central battlefield, directly challenging black's doubled pawns and demanding a response that could unravel their pawn structure. Unleashing the bishop to d6 repositions it for an aggressive role, eyeing the white king's defensive setup and creating immediate pressure on the d4 pawn, which now lacks central defenders. This active placement promises to disrupt white's centralized pieces and offers black improved coordination, potentially setting the stage for a sharp tactical skirmish where control of key diagonals becomes paramount. Sensing an opportunity to disrupt black's pawn structure and open lines towards the king, white initiates a tactical sequence with a knight sacrifice. The intention is to exploit the resulting disarray and force black into a defensive posture, potentially creating weaknesses around their monarch. This exchange promises an aggressive middle game, where white aims to leverage the temporary advantage in initiative. Embracing the queen's central influence, black repositions the queen to attack the newly established knight outposts and, more importantly, prepares for future pawn structure consolidation. The rook's sudden appearance on the open file immediately targets the enemy king's sanctuary, forcing a defensive reaction. Abandoning the king from its central safety now opens a Pandora's box of tactical possibilities for white, as the e-file looms large and the weakened dark squares around the black monarch become prime targets for immediate exploitation. Harnessing the open d-file, white injects knight pressure to the queenside, aiming to dislodge black's queen and potentially exploit the weakened kingside pawn structure should the queen retreat without adequate support. A bold attempt to disrupt white's dominant kingside presence, seeking to open lines and potentially expose the enemy monarch while simultaneously creating counterplay. The knight's migration to d6 opens a critical diagonal for the queen and threatens the pinned rook. Reclaiming the pawn, black accepts a pawn structure that, while a bit disjointed, keeps pieces on the board and the king relatively safe for the moment, aiming to untangle things later. Unleashing the bishop to f4 sharpens the attack on the d6 pawn, adding pressure to black's awkwardly placed pieces. Asserting central control with the pawn spear creates immediate tension and challenges white's king's safety by opening lines. The queen now actively surveys the center, potentially threatening the e6 pawn and adding pressure along the third rank, while simultaneously preparing to support a future advance on the queenside. Opening the h-file, black boldly invites tactical complications, a sharp decision that sacrifices material for a potential onslaught against white's king. The queen's arrival at b7 seizes control of the c-file, creating immediate pressure on black's doubled pawns and aiming to exploit the open lines that white has so skillfully manufactured. This aggressive repositioning not only threatens further material gains but also forces black to constantly calculate defensive sequences, potentially leading to positional concessions. Unleashing a desperate kingside pawn storm, black sacrifices their h-pawn to rip open the defensive structure around white's monarch. This audacious pawn push, while offering immediate tactical complications, simultaneously weakens black's own king further, creating a double-edged situation where precision is paramount for both sides. White must now navigate the ensuing chaos, seeking to consolidate their advantage amidst the storm, while Black gambles on a knockout blow. This is a crucial moment where White prioritizes fortifying the kingside and creating a safe haven, rather than directly engaging the exposed enemy monarch. By bringing the bishop back, White aims to build a solid defensive structure, anticipating Black's potential counterplay and preparing to consolidate the material advantage, potentially transitioning towards a more strategic, positional battle. Securing the open c-file with the rook immediately addresses the positional imbalance created by White's queen's advanced position, offering a more active role for Black's heaviest piece. Unleashing a forceful check, White initiates a tactical sequence that forces Black to confront an immediate decision regarding their king's safety. This pinpoints to a latent vulnerability developing around the monarch, creating a dynamic imbalance in the center. Observe how the queen's repositioning exploits the current disarray in Black's pawn structure and creates opportunities for further pressure. It's a moment where Black must carefully evaluate the consequences of blocking the check, as each response could lead to a significant positional shift or even a material giveaway. The geometrical arrangement of pieces now favors White's active queen and knight coordination,